Next we have G. Wesley Johnson, co-founder of the first major public history program in the United States at UC Santa Barbara in 1976, and founding editor of the journal that gave the field a voice, again, the Public Historian. 2 years later, Dr. Johnson has influenced each of us in this room. He was the driving force behind the 1979 meetings in Montecito, California, and Washington, D.C. that birthed NCPH, and served as the organization's first president. Dr. Johnson received his PhD in history at Columbia University and taught at Stanford University, UC Santa Barbara, and Brigham Young State University. Since retirement from teaching, he has been active in the consulting world as a partner in the firm Ashby & Johnson. We have a special guest today, a fourth panelist who will be joining us. Lindsay Reed, the longtime managing editor of the Public Historian, will also be joining the conversation, and Dr. Johnson will introduce her a little more fully a bit later on.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here. And let me express, first of all, my thanks to Arnita and Phil and Lindsay to participate in this NCPH historical panel. These are busy people who are at the summit of what they do. Arnita, head of our oldest and senior historical organization, the AHA, and Phil, head of one of the oldest and most distinguished historical consulting firms in public history, and Lindsay, managing editor of one of the great journals, the Public Historian. Of course, I'm biased. Today we're taking a retrospective look at the early years of public history and a quick peek at the years ahead. I will do the following. First, discuss the founding of the nation's first graduate program in public history at UC Santa Barbara in '76. Second, the founding of the first journal of public history, the Public Historian, in '78. Third, the two important conferences in '79 in Montecito, which is a suburb of Santa Barbara, and the other in Washington, D.C., which led to the formation of the NCPH. I will then make a few remarks about my experiences in consulting after retiring from academia, and then we'll comment on what I see on the horizon for public history. So, first of all, Robert Kelly, who was a visionary professor of American history, but who was never interested in organizations, that wasn't his bag, yeah, at Santa Barbara, called me into his office one day, in I guess 1975 or 76, whenever it was. And Bob had done much work he had done much commissioned litigation work in California, and now I had the idea to found a new graduate program in something he called public history. As a more junior professor, I was delighted with his invitation from a senior professor to co-found this new endeavor. He knew that I was interested in this because I had just received a commission myself from the City Fathers in Phoenix to go back and spend some time doing a history of Phoenix, which had never been done before. In other words, a commissioned public history project. After announcing our program, we were pleased that 7 new graduate students appeared, and we were launched on an endeavor. Marty Sullivan at NEH, who we were in touch with, agreed that this was a good idea, and he advanced us a generous grant that made it possible for us to bring in weekly speakers who we identified as public historians. In other words, the idea was, who are people who are out there? There were people doing public history, but there was no way to find out who they were. You couldn't ask the OAH or the AHA; they didn't know who they were. And so we got this grant with Sullivan of NEH to identify and bring in over the next several years speakers every week to talk about historians. And of course, I know one of my colleagues in Santa Barbara said, well, I understand you had a wine historian coming in. I said, yeah, he's a big guy up in Napa Valley. A wine historian? I said, yeah, that's an example of public history. And he kind of raised his eyebrows. But anyway, that was what we were doing. After a few months, though, it dawned on me that these talks in which visitors told what they were doing in public and private sectors as historians would be of interest to others. Therefore, we started the Santa Barbara Occasional Papers in Public History series, which we published for 2 years. And these are small format, just basically transcripts of the talks. Our program attracted much attention, and we soon found ourselves in alliance with Arnita Jones and her Committee for the Promotion of History. And has been mentioned some of the conferences in the East that I had the privilege of meeting Arnita and attending to find out the different things that were bubbling up from the surface in the East. Many historians who were seeking alternative careers took an interest in our publications, and it's fair to say that we were soon in the midst of what can be called the public history movement, as other universities called for information wanted to find out what we were doing. For example, other pioneers were Carnegie Mellon University and the University of South Carolina. There were others, but they're two most notable ones. So at this point, we were able at Santa Barbara to negotiate a generous grant with Lydia Bronte of the Rockefeller Foundation for graduate fellowships for our program, so that we could really build a cadre of people who were going not only for their master's degrees, we started out, but also to fund people who would go for their doctorates, so we could really get some serious people in the pipeline. At this time, we began to look over the Santa Barbara papers and got a new idea. I had learned how to put out a monthly publication as an undergraduate at Harvard. 3 years of editing the Harvard Lampoon with one John Updike and Jack Lippert, who was my college roommate at Harvard, who was here sitting in the first row. And Jack and John Updike and I, others, but we were three the most important people, to be modest, on the Lampoon. But the point is, the Lampoon gave me the confidence and the know-how to put out a publication. And so I know some people say the background of the Harvard Lampoon to found a academic journal. Well, you know, it seemed to me that there was something here. So I called up Lydia and I said, "Hey, look, I think we could start a full-fledged scholarly journal rather than putting out these occasional papers that are, you know, they're neither here nor there." So she okayed using our discretionary funds that we had left over in our scholarships. And so I contacted Alan Henon of the UC Press and said, you know, anyway, we could get you guys to publish this. And he said, well, if you can prove there is a need and an audience over the next 2 years that you have this grant, then we would be willing to become your publisher. But Alain is a good French-American, had much skepticism in his voice. He wasn't too enthusiastic. But armed with the Rockefeller funds and with a band of enthusiastic graduate students, we started publishing in 1978 and had a terrific response both in subscriptions and in manuscript submissions. That's really the gauge. If people start subscribing and people start sending you manuscripts, well, it shows you're really probably on the way. There was definitely a need, and therefore we then felt that we wanted to sign with UC Press, but there was a problem. There was an intercampus University of California committee that had to pass on this idea. And an envious Berkeley campus at the meeting strongly objected. After all, we at Berkeley don't have a journal. Why should Santa Barbara have a history journal? But all of the other UC campuses, annoyed at this display of arrogance, voted to support UC Santa Barbara, and we were home free. The Berkeley people dug their own grave, so to speak. And it was really funny. At any rate, the question now was that we needed a paid professional managing editor because we had struggled on with student help and several other faculty plus myself devoting our time to it.